Parties that this call is now being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to Patty Breen. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you very much for attending HRSA's first Risk Management audio conference of 2012, entitled Developing and Maintaining an Effective Credentialing and Privileging Program. My name is Patty Breen, and I'm with the Office of Quality and Data in the Bureau of Primary Health Care at HRSA. Today's presentation is the sixth in a series of risk management audio conferences designed to assist you in developing an effective, robust, clinical risk management program in your health center or free clinic. We at BIPIC are committed to supporting your efforts to deliver quality health care to your patient population. To that end, we have been busy working with our partners, Apt Associates and ECRI Institute, to provide you with a variety of quality, risk management, and patient safety guidance and resources, such as today's audio conference. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us in this timely and important audio conference. I will now turn over the program to Mr. Paul Anderson.
Thanks, Patty. On slide 2 in the handouts, you'll see more information about us at ECRI Institute. We're an independent, nonprofit, applied research institute, and over the past 4 decades, we've helped thousands of healthcare organizations across the nation develop patient safety, healthcare quality, and risk management programs to improve patient care. With your audio conference registration confirmation, you received an email link with the slide handouts. We hope you've had the opportunity to print or download the slides. Throughout this audio conference, we'll refer to slide or page numbers in the handout so you can follow along. Again, this is a continuation of our Brown Bag Lunch audio conferences, all of which are archived on the Clinical Risk Management website if you missed them live. We will have a question and answer session at the conclusion of today's program. However, keep in mind that this audio conference is not the appropriate place to discuss detailed, case-specific aspects of unresolved claims or litigation. Likewise, risk management information provided in this audio conference is not to be considered legal advice, and as with any information provided by ECRI Institute, it's intended as guidance to be used consistent with the internal needs of your organization. This information is not to be viewed as required by ECRI Institute or HRSA. Any detailed, fact-specific health center issues should be addressed to the FTCA helpline, and all questions regarding pending legal cases should be directed to your own organization's private attorneys. I'm now going to turn the program over to Madeline Quattrone. Madeline is a senior risk management analyst here at ECRI Institute, where she serves as the legal editor for our risk management publications and provides various consulting services to ECRI Institute clients. Before joining ECRI, Madeline was a partner in a law firm in New Jersey where she defended physicians, hospitals, and other healthcare providers in medical negligence lawsuits. She was among the first women lawyers in that state to achieve certification by the New Jersey Supreme Court as a civil trial attorney. Also with us today is Kathy Szostak. Kathy is a nurse with 20 years of experience in healthcare risk management, the most recent of which have been focused on patient safety and medical error prevention. She has risk management consultative experience within the medical malpractice insurance industry and management experience at the corporate risk management level of a large multi-specialty physician group. And with that, I'll hand the program over to Madeline.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome everyone. I hope that you've all had a moment to take a look at the learning objectives that are listed on slide 3. On slide 4, we define credentialing. Credentialing is the process of assessing and confirming the qualifications of healthcare providers such as physicians, nurse midwives, nurse practitioners, licensed registered nurses, and certified practitioners or technicians such as dental hygienists, laboratory technicians, and radiology technicians. Very simply put, credentialing is a way of determining whether the provider is who he or she says he is and verifying his or her professional qualifications. Credentialing is a due diligence effort that can filter out potentially troublesome providers before they start treating patients at your health center. The process involves verifying licensure, certification, registration, and other forms of professional qualification. It includes collecting and verifying information about a practitioner, assessing and interpreting the information, and making decisions about the practitioner's qualifications. At a minimum, credentialing is a screening process that can identify and weed out unqualified individuals. Moving on to slide 5, privileging may be considered as a second phase of the credentialing process. It's a competency phase. Once a health center has appropriately credentialed a practitioner, the next step is for the center to authorize the practitioner to provide specific services to its patients. So privileging is the complex process of authorizing the specific scope and content of patient care services based on an evaluation of the healthcare practitioner's clinical qualifications and competence. The health center needs to adopt a policy that outlines specific privileging requirements for licensed independent practitioners and certified practitioners and how frequently these privileges will be reviewed. The decision to grant a particular clinical privilege is based on the practitioner's training, experience, proficiency, competency, and performance in managing and treating patients and performing procedures and practices. Privileges should be appropriate to the specialty of the practitioner and appropriate for the scope of services that are offered by the health center, as may be circumscribed by the facility's license capacity, the medical equipment that's available in the facility, and staff. Health centers and free clinics should check corresponding requirements for HRSA. The reasons why credentialing and privileging healthcare providers is so important are listed on slide 6. Investigation, review, and ongoing evaluation of a provider's skills, education, and experiences through a well-developed credentialing process can safeguard patients, improve the quality of care, and minimize liability. Health centers and free clinics are at risk for lawsuits for failure to credential or for negligent credentialing if the credentialing processes are not carried out completely and effectively. On slide 7, we see a list of some acts and omissions that can place the facility at risk of liability. Negligent credentialing is a claim that is typically asserted in a lawsuit brought by or on behalf of patients allegedly injured as a result of medical negligence. The claim is that the healthcare facility either failed to credential the healthcare provider or acted carelessly when conducting the credentialing process. The claim argues that the facility's failure to properly conduct credentialing and privileging or peer review directly contributed to the patient's injury, and that the patient would not have been injured if those processes had been conducted properly. These lawsuits typically focus on the legal and regulatory requirements for credentialing and privileging and any applicable accreditation standards. Typically, before asserting a negligent credentialing claim, a plaintiff's lawyer will perform some type of informal discovery of the practitioner's background to find out what the healthcare center knew or should have known about the practitioner's qualifications and competence. On slide 8, we see that health centers need to exercise reasonable care to make sure that the healthcare providers working in their centers are currently and continuously competent and qualified to exercise the clinical privileges that are needed for the specific services they provide at the center. Be sensitive to risk indicators or red flags. These might include resignation from a medical staff, a pending investigative proceeding by a licensing board, claims of federal or state regulatory or financial fraud and abuse or other misconduct, or a history of jury verdicts in settlements through which you can look for a pattern. Slide 9 lists some privileging criteria. Related to privileging, the potential risks or red flags might include voluntary or involuntary limitation, reduction or loss of clinical privileges, and voluntary or involuntary termination of a medical staff membership. Negative information that's received from a practitioner's peers should not be ignored, even if it is communicated informally. Facilities that grant privileges without investigating negative information risk liability for negligent credentialing in the event that a patient is harmed as a result. Moving on to slide 10. Review your facility's credentialing policies and procedures periodically. These policies and procedures are needed to help you assess the credentials of each licensed or certified healthcare practitioner, including employed, contracted, volunteer, and temporary practitioners who are currently practicing at all of your health center sites. Examine your facility's credentialing and privileging policies and procedures from a risk management and patient safety perspective, and ensure that the credentialing process meets the legal and regulatory requirements as well as applicable accreditation standards, and that the process facilitates patient safety. A sample credentialing and privileging policy is available on the Clinical Risk Management Program website at the link on the slide. Moving on to slide 11, as we've mentioned, the credentialing process involves verifying the licensure, certification, training, and education of a healthcare provider, as well as other areas such as health fitness and immunization status. These tables, which are from HRSA Policy Information Notice 2002-22, are a source that you can use when determining whether to use primary or secondary source verification of a provider's credentials. This table on the left-hand side covers source verification for credentialing. So, as you can see, for a licensed independent practitioner, such as a physician, nurse practitioner, or dentist, you may want to use primary source verification for licensure, education, training, and current competence, confirmed statement for verification of health fitness, governing body approval authority, and secondary source verification may be appropriate for areas such as photo identification, immunization status, and DEA registration. For other licensed or certified practitioners, such as registered nurses or dietitians, secondary source verification is okay in most cases, except for verification of licensure. Moving over to the table on the right-hand side of the slide, types of verification you may want to use for initial granting of privileges and renewal or revision of privileges are covered here. You'll find a full-page version of this table at the end of the handouts that you received by email. Moving on to slide 12, we identify what counts as primary source verification. Primary source verification involves reviewing the original source of a specific credential. So, for example, this could include direct correspondence with an educational institution or healthcare organization, correspondence by telephone or internet, reports from credentials verification organizations, or checking databases such as those listed on this slide. Moving on to slide 13. Secondary source verification can be from sources other than the original source, such as photocopies of documents. So, for example, providers may submit copies of their photo identification if your policies state that this type of verification can be from a secondary source. Copies of DEA administration registration cards might also be submitted as secondary sources. Now that we've covered some of the background and legal and regulatory issues related to credentialing and privileging, let's look at some practical tips for conducting the credentialing and privileging processes. On slide 14, we see the 4 things that you need in order to get this process started. Practitioner cooperation. Practitioners, for example, who come from another in-state practice or health center must provide a letter from their prior employer that identifies their last date of service that will help eliminate any gaps. Set timeliness and due dates. Investigate your insurance carrier requirements, if any, and know their deadlines. Start the process immediately. Documentation. Create a checklist of items that you will need to get from the provider. And finally, a tracking system. Develop a paper or computer tracking system to ensure that nothing lapses or fails to be updated. Moving on to slide 15, an often overlooked but very important element in the credentialing process is ensuring practitioner cooperation in this process. Cooperation is key to successful and timely credentialing. A strategy that some organizations use is to make their prospective employees and current employees fully accountable to the credentialing process. The need for cooperation is made clear through provisions in the facility employment agreement that spells out the practitioner's responsibility for assisting in successful credentialing. Before hiring a new practitioner, carefully examine the practitioner's curriculum vitae and make sure that it makes sense. Look for red flags. Be sure there are starting and end dates for past periods of work. Look for any gaps in professional activity. The health center should be satisfied in the end that it can respond adequately to questions about the practitioner's experience and academic training. A checklist of items and documents that are required for credentialing makes complying with the requirements easier for the credentialing staff and for the practitioner to identify and collect all of the necessary information expeditiously and at one time, rather than having to make multiple requests over time. One issue that can create headaches and havoc if not identified and addressed appropriately and immediately is a discrepancy with regard to the practitioner's name, either first or last name. Discrepancies might occur as a result of administrative errors or when a practitioner has legally changed his or her name. Moving to slide 16, a key element is to set due dates and create timelines. Following the progress of a request for documentation can help ensure that deadlines are met. For example, if the practitioner needs a state medical assistance number, it must be applied for immediately because it takes time to obtain it. Follow-up is essential. Nothing is more frustrating than to find out late in the game that required information is missing. Moving on to slide 17. Consider requiring independent licensed practitioners to sign a standard authorization that permits the health center and those involved in the health center's credentialing process to consult with members of the medical staffs of other facilities regarding the practitioner's clinical competence. Require practitioners to acknowledge by their signature that any misstatement or false or omitted information that they submit for credentialing purposes may constitute grounds for denial or revocation. Practitioners should agree to release the health center and its facilities, representatives, and medical staff from liability for their acts performed in good faith and without malice in connection with gathering, obtaining, exchanging, and verifying documents, records, and other information pertaining to their application for credentials or privileges. Application forms, signed releases, and authorizations should be retained as part of the practitioner's credentials file. And you'll find a full-page version of this slide at the end of your handouts. On slide 18, we'll talk about contracting with credentials verification organizations. Contracting with a CVO can relieve the health center of much of the administrative burden involved in credentialing. But be aware, contracting with a CVO does not relieve a health center of its own legal duty to obtain complete and accurate credentialing information. In other words, the health center remains responsible for the legal consequences if the CVO is negligent in verifying or providing credentialing information. So your contracts with CVOs should include indemnification provisions that would require the CVO to reimburse the health center for any damages incurred by the health center as a result of the CVO's negligence. Your facility should vet prospective CVOs carefully. The National Committee for Quality Assurance provides a service that evaluates CVOs and provides certification to those that meet its criteria. And a link to this information from NCQA appears on this slide. Now I'll turn the problem back to Paul for a polling question to our audience.
Thanks, Madeline. You'll find our first polling question on slide number 19, where we'd like to know about your health center or free clinic's current status with regard to CVOs. So, again, you'll see the potential responses to this polling question on slide 19. If you do currently contract with a CVO, please press star 1. If you do not currently contract with a CVO but plan to do so in the future, please press star 2. And finally, if you do not currently contract with a CVO and you do not plan to do so, please press star 3. Again, those responses: if you do currently contract, star 1. If you do not but plan to, star 2. If you do not and have no intention to do so, please press star 3. While the responses are being tabulated, I'll just mention that we will have a summary of these responses to this and the other polling questions in the next issue of our Risk and Safety e-News that comes out this Friday, the 24th. And if you don't currently receive that biweekly Risk and Safety e-News from us, at the very end of today's presentation, we'll show you some contact information, how to get back in touch with us, so we can make sure that you are added to the distribution list for this free service. And Catherine, is the polling closed?
Thank you. Yes, the polling is now closed.
Okay, then we'll give it back to Madeline and slide 20.
Thank you, Paul. On slide 20, we have an important reminder that you must address all levels of practitioners who are currently practicing in your health center. That includes full-time, part-time, volunteer, and temporary practitioners. Temporary privileges may be granted under certain circumstances, which are listed on this slide. Moving to slide 21, just a note about ensuring that there is an appeals process for providers to appeal from the health center's adverse credentialing and privileging decisions. It's always wise to obtain legal review of the appeals process to ensure that it meets fundamental concepts of fairness and due process as set forth in the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act, a federal law that we'll discuss in just a little while later in this presentation. Moving to slide 22, it is important that the health center maintains complete, organized files for each provider's credentialing and privileging information. Review each file at least once every year to identify any items that might be missing. For tips on organizing your files, you can refer to the Guide for Preparing Files for an FTCA site visit on the Clinical Risk Management website at the link that appears on this slide. Moving to slide 23, you see that tracking spreadsheets or electronic files are ways that can be used to keep track of credentialing information. We'll see some examples of these in a minute. If you have Outlook on your computers, the Outlook Tasks or Reminders function can be used to remind you to request updated forms from providers when necessary, and can also be used to indicate that you've taken that step. On slide 24, we have one example of an at-a-glance tracking spreadsheet. You can go to the end of your handouts that you receive by email for a full-page version of this resource. Slide 25 shows an example of a new provider credentialing checklist. Creating a checklist of required documents and attaching to the inside cover of the credentialing file helps to ensure that no documentation is missed and that the file includes each of the items. As with the tracking spreadsheet, a full-page version of this tool is available at the end of your handout. An example of a spreadsheet you can use to maintain a list of credentialed providers appears on slide 26. This list is prepared in an Excel spreadsheet. It includes information such as the provider's name, title, professional designation, specialty, employee status, in other words, full-time, part-time, contractor, volunteer, the date of hire, the current credentialing date, and the next re-credential date. You'll want to go back and check that current credentialing date to make sure all that you are keeping up to date with re-credentialing and that all providers have been re-credentialed according to your health center's or free clinics policies, which may be every 2 years, for example. You can find the sample spreadsheet in the sample tool titled Preparing Credentialing List for FTCA Deeming Application, which is available as part of the Credentialing Toolkit that's on the Clinical Risk Management Program website. And again, a full-page version of this is at the end of your handouts. On slide 27, we see that maintaining confidentiality of credentialing and privileging information is really important because there may be potential legal repercussions if this information is not safeguarded. Health centers must take steps, such as educating staff, to protect the confidentiality of credentialing and privileging information. A health center may not disclose this information to an entity not involved in the credentialing and privileging processes without the practitioner's consent. Reports received from the National Practitioner Data Bank, Npdb, for example, must be secured within the practitioner's credentialing file and remain confidential to avoid risk of civil monetary penalties. Slide 28 reminds us of an important step health centers need to take. Be sure that policies and procedures address safeguarding confidentiality when storing and transporting credentialing files. This includes paper files that are transported and stored physically, as well as digital files that are transported and filed electronically. You can find useful federal guidance concerning electronic health information security standards from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Civil Rights, at the link listed on the slide. Now I'll turn the problem back to Paul for our second polling question.
Thanks, Madeline. And you'll see the second polling question on slide 29. We'd like to know whether you use electronic systems or paper files for documenting credentialing information. If you use only electronic systems to document credentialing information, please press star 1. If you use a combination of electronic and paper systems for credentialing information, please press star 2. If you use paper files only for credentialing information, please press star 3. Again, you'll see the responses on slide 29. If you use electronic only, star 1. Combination of electronic and paper, star 2. If paper only, please press star 3. While the responses are coming in, I'll remind you once more that we will have a summary of responses in the Friday, February 24th issue of the Risk and Safety e-News. And again, remind you that if you don't currently receive that e-News every other Friday, to please get in touch with us. We'll make sure that we get you on the list, and we will go over that contact information at the very end of today's program. Okay. Are we good to go, Catherine?
Thank you. The polling session is now closed.
Okay. Back to Madeline, slide 30.
And thank you, Paul. Let's speak briefly about peer review as it relates to credentialing and privileging. The peer review process is a quality improvement process that is intended to improve the overall quality of clinical care. Health centers should ensure that peer review as conducted in the facility meets both federal law requirements and applicable state law requirements. Health centers should consult legal counsel who is well-versed in the field of health law to ensure that policies and procedures satisfy all relevant legal requirements. Otherwise, the health center may not be able to invoke the immunity or benefit from legal privileges that protect peer review from discovery in medical malpractice lawsuits. On slide 31, we discuss a very important federal law, the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act, sometimes called HCQIA, which was enacted in 1986 and later amended in 1998. That law was enacted with two important goals. The first, to eradicate the problem of incompetent physicians moving from state to escape detection, and its second goal, to provide a means to improve the quality of medical care in the U.S. This law encourages credentialing and peer review by providing immunity from liability for those who participate in professional review activity in good faith, that means without malice toward the practitioners who are being reviewed, and who conduct peer review according to HCQIA standards. The law, HCQIA, does not provide immunity from damages that are based upon a violation of state or federal civil rights laws, or in criminal cases or in cases brought by governmental agencies. And immunity is not available for an adverse peer review action that is not based on the competence or professional conduct of a practitioner. Moving on to slide 32, we highlight an obstacle that must be overcome. Your health center must overcome any misperception that credentialing, privileging, and peer review is simply an administrative burden or chore. When you educate staff and discuss credentialing with leadership, remind them that investigation, review, and ongoing evaluation of a practitioner's skills, education, and experiences through the process of credentialing and privileging and peer review are among the most important legal and ethical responsibilities of the health center's governing body. It should be viewed as an important element in fostering a culture of patient safety. Slide 33 reminds us to take a look at the health center's processes to see whether barriers exist that are related to peer review. These might include, for example, the misperception that peer review processes are conducted as disciplinary tasks rather than as educational opportunities for practitioners. Also perceiving or misperceiving that because there may be time constraints, you can take shortcuts. Make sure that there aren't any breakdowns in analyzing trends. And make sure that there is no failure with regard to connecting peer review with credentialing and re-credentialing processes. Connect the dots. Slide 34 lists some ways to build a robust peer review system in your healthcare center or free clinic. A brief word about the Npdb Continuous Query Service, that's the National Practitioner Data Bank, with an emphasis on the word continuous. This is a service that is provided for a small fee by Npdb and keeps your health center informed about the adverse licensure, privileging, Medicare and Medicare exclusions, civil and criminal convictions, and medical malpractice payments made on behalf of your enrolled practitioners. When you enroll a practitioner, you receive an email notification within 24 hours of a report received by the data bank concerning the enrolled practitioner, and you always have access to data bank information on the enrolled practitioners. Moving to slide 35, just a little while ago, we noted that health centers should connect peer review to credentialing. For credentialing, you'll want to obtain information on your physicians from primary sources. This due diligence helps filter out potentially troublesome physicians before they get into the health center. Procedure should require that information about disciplinary actions that were taken against a practitioner as a result of adverse peer review is also placed in the provider's credentials file. Slide 36 reminds us that timing is an important factor. Like credentialing and privileging, peer review is not a one-time event. It should be an ongoing process so that the practitioner's skills, education, and experiences are evaluated on an ongoing basis to ensure continuous quality of care. If problems are detected, it's best to address them as soon as possible. Waiting to address them later can allow poor quality of care to continue and make the process unnecessarily confrontational or disciplinary when it does not need to be. On slide 37, we've mentioned several times that peer review should not be misperceived as a disciplinary process. A better way to look at this is in the context of developing strategies for improvement. To view it as an educational process, not disciplinary, because the intent of the peer review provides practitioners with information and insight about their performance that is used to improve patient safety and the overall quality of their care. On slide 38, in addition to using peer review as an educational tool, what else can you do with these findings? If you have a system to collect and analyze quality performance data, regularly evaluating the data, identifying trends or problem areas, and developing strategies to address and improve problem areas are good quality improvement activities for your facility. Additional skills training or other training and education may be needed for practitioners who fall outside of the norm. Some of the resources available to you on the ECRI Institute Clinical Risk Management Program website are listed on slide 39, and access to the website is provided to you free on behalf of HRSA. I think you'll find the Credentialing Toolkit especially helpful. It includes sample policies, a step-by-step credentialing guide, a credentialing timeline and checklist, a sample application packet, and other forms and resources that you can download and use in your health centers and free clinics. We also provide a guidance article on human resources that covers credentialing as well as other hiring and human resource issues. In addition, you should have received a Get Safe email on January 16 that covered establishing a credentialing and privileging program. This email is also archived on the Clinical Risk Management Program website. If you need a username and password to access the website, or if you need to get on the distribution list for the Get Safe emails, please contact us at the contact information listed on this slide. And now I'll turn the program back to Paul.
Thanks, Madeline. And on slide 40, you'll see our final polling question for today. And we'd simply like to know how many people are in the room with you listening to the presentation. And again, the potential answers are listed on slide 40. We just ask you to please press star, followed by the number of people in the room with you. So if you're there by yourself, please press star 1. There are 2 people, please press star 2. 3 people, star 3, and so on. If you have 9 or any number greater than 9 of folks with you, please press star 9 at this time. Once we wrap up with this polling question, we'll turn it back over to Madeline for a brief conclusion, and then that's when we will open up the lines for our question and answer period. So you might want to also be thinking about your questions for that time as well. Okay, is our polling wrapped up?
Thank you. The polling question is now closed.
Okay, Madeline?
In concluding, we hope that the information that we've provided to you will be useful in your credentialing and privileging processes, and that you'll find the resources that we used to put together this presentation available to you listed on slides 41 and 42. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Madeline. Catherine, at this time, I think we'll open it up for the Q&A.
Thank you. At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly at the prompt. Once again, that is star 1 on your touch-tone phone. It does take a few moments for the questions to come through. Please stand by.
While the questions are queuing up, I'll just direct everyone to slide 43, which is the final slide in the handouts before you get to some of the full-page handouts. And that's where you'll find contact information for signing up for getting on the distribution list for our emails, and also access to the Clinical Risk Management website that Madeline mentioned during the program, where you'll see some of the ECRI Institute resources. Our email address is clinical_RM_program@ecri.org. And our phone number is area code 610-825-6000. And you can reach us at extension 5200. And again, you'll see that information on the final slide in today's program. And we can help you not only with access to the resources we've talked about, but also if you have additional questions that we can't cover during the Q&A. we can also be more than happy to address them in that either by email or phone there as well. Okay. Do we have any questions queued up?
Our first question comes from Leslie Terry. Go ahead, your line is open.
Hi, I'm new to credentialing and to this medical industry, whatever you want to call it. And my question is, as HR manager, when can I legally begin the credentialing process? Does it have to be post-offer? Can it be pre-offer, or when?
That's a very good question. Some organizations actually start their credentialing with almost a pre-application process, because the first step is to make sure that the applicant is a fit for your facility. For example, an applicant who may wish to offer obstetrical services when your facility does not offer professional services can be screened out immediately. So I would say if you want to do a pre-application form and then an application form, you can actually start your credentialing once you have vetted inappropriate practitioners because they just don't fit into your facility model. So the sooner you get an application, the quicker you want to begin your credentialing process, because it does take time.
Yes. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Candy Olson. Go ahead. Your line is open.
I have two questions. First question is the National Practitioners Data Bank. Am I required to query the National Practitioners Data Bank for all licensed professionals? And the second question is, there was a comment made that we need to have consent from providers to report situations or concerns, I guess. We're wondering if the consent has to be, is your consent from the providers, is that specific to the state licensing board or to the board of directors?
I believe that the consent requirement that I mentioned was with regard to giving the health facility consent to contact practitioners that may be used as references from other facilities. For example, if you want to speak with former colleagues of a physician, you would need to get the consent or authorization from the applicant. That was the context in which I believe we had discussed consent or authorization. And with regard to the National Practitioner Database, I believe that that information is probably part of the HRSA requirements that you may want to check. But all licensed practitioners are information is collected on them in the National Practitioner Database.
Thank you. Our next question is from Christine Porter. Go ahead, your line is open.
Hi, I have two questions. One is that we've done a lot of work on our credentialing policy, updating it and renewing it. And I got the impression that we should have a separate policy for privileging, or can that be all kind of wrapped into one policy and procedure? And my second question is on slide 11, when we are talking about verification of current competency under primary versus secondary source verification, you're saying primary source written. Could you give me is that where you're talking about competencies, for example, from the person's former employer or a colleague out in the community, and specifically what should that verification state about the practitioner?
Okay, let's go to your first question. Credentialing and privileging and how you structure your policy was really what works best in your facility, but being mindful that these are two different phases of the process. So, you want to make sure that you're delineating what deals with specifically with credentialing and what deals with privileging. Privileging is the actual authorization of the scope of practice, whereas credentialing is your vetting.
Okay.
So first you credential, and then you privilege in accordance with the qualifications that you have found to be accurate and verified.
Okay.
And And with regard to the primary and secondary source verification, your question was a little bit detailed, so I'm trying to sort of parse it out again.
Maybe if you could restate it just so that we can make sure we're answering it.
I apologize. In your verification of current competency, I guess, could you define exactly what that is, who it comes from, and what it should say about your practitioner or your applicant?
When you're talking about verification for current competency, you may want to make sure, first of all, that the individual remains licensed. You're verifying all of those basic documentation that the person has gotten the education that's required, has gotten the certifications that are required. All of those should come from a primary source. The school, the licensing board.
Okay.
Does that help you? I'm not sure I'm actually answering your question.
Well, I guess when I was looking at this, I was thinking competency was more in line with the practitioner's actual competency about being able to operate within the scope of whatever your health center is they need to do. So I guess for me, yes, I do all the primary source verification with their schools, the AMA, the National Practitioner Database, DEA, all that. But when it comes to the competency, I guess that's to me more of like a privilege. I mean, you have it under credential.
Competency is where you may want to be contacting the practitioner's previous colleagues.
Okay, and that's what I'm trying to get to. I'm sorry, that's exactly what I'm trying to get to.
Yes.
Is that what that is? Okay.
Thank you. The next
when
question.
When using a phone call as a primary source verification, for example, speaking with a former colleague of the applicant, you'll want to document the date and time and the person from whom the information was received. That would be very, very important because at some time in the future, if you had to answer any questions about the source of this information, you don't want to get into a he said, she said. You've got it documented, who you have spoken to, who has verified that they may have observed this practitioner performing certain procedures, may have been involved in actually reviewing this individual in the past, that sort of verification of competency.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure that I understood that. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Levatris Sinkfield. Go ahead, your line is open.
Hi, thank you very much. I have two questions, and the first one is on the National Practitioner Database, because we're finding some of our agencies want that to happen more often. We signed up for the continuous, which I really like. But my question is, do we need to go further than the National Practitioner Database queries for purposes, I guess, of HRSA and look at what OFAC might have or the Office of the Inspector General, Champus, et cetera?
The exclusions list is something that is very, very important to make sure that the individual has not been excluded from Medicare or Medicaid.
Okay.
Certainly any red flags that you may pick up would want to be followed more thoroughly to make sure that you're not missing any gaps.
Okay.
So, usually that the National Practitioner Database is pretty thorough, but it just may lead you to looking for more information. But always check the exclusions list. That's really true.
That sounds good. And then my second question is pretty simple, I hope. We re-credential every 2 years, of course, and then there was a note on one of your slides to look at your files at least annually. What do you do at that point in time if you find a document is missing? Just document it at that point in time?
Well, if you find something missing, you've got to act on it because if you've got knowledge that something is not there, if you don't know what it is, what's missing, you could be missing something very, very crucial that may have been either hidden inadvertently or something slipped through the cracks that never should have. So you need to act on that immediately.
Okay. This is Kathy, if I might comment on that as well. Instead of, depending on the number of providers and staff that you're credentialing, I would advise that you consider doing that on an ongoing or rolling basis rather than putting everyone through at the same time, and that way it helps you to be a little bit more careful and have some more time to be sure that your records are complete and so forth. Okay. And then one other thought I had about contacting accessing the data bank, if there are other insurance carriers, malpractice carriers, and so forth, you certainly want to be contacting them for information on malpractice claim history and so forth, with the provider's consent, of course.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question is from Cindy Haynes. Go ahead. Your line is open.
Yes, hi. I think this is pretty simple. Protecting confidentiality. Is the NPI number and the DEA number considered confidential, or can that be given to, say, a pharmacy if they call?
Well, we're talking about protecting confidentiality in the context of privileging and credentialing. So in that context, you have got to make sure that that information is safeguarded so that no one who is outside of the authority of performing those functions has access to the credentialing and privileging information. On the other hand, if you need to use to give a number to a pharmacy, for example, to make sure that a required function of the practitioner is being carried out, like ordering a prescription, that's not taking what is a credentialing information as such, because you're not giving credentialing information away. You're giving information that is required for a prescription to be filled. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, you're not talking about the credentialing. You're not telling the pharmacist that you've conducted a credentialing and privileging review of this particular provider and giving information related to that process.
Thank you. Our next question is from Pamela Angel. Go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi. I'm very new to this process. I just started a couple months ago at this healthcare clinic, never having been in the healthcare field. So I was wondering, how does the Deeming application fit into the credentialing?
This is Paul. I'll jump in here. I think, unfortunately, we really can't go into a lot of detail about the sort of the specific requirements of the Deeming application. What I'll do, though, is direct you to the Bureau of Primary Health Care helpline, and I'll read out the phone number and email address and make sure that you've got it there. It's 1-877-974-2742. Again, that's 877-974-2742, or their email is BPHC for Bureau of Primary Health Care, so BPHC helpline at HRSA.gov. And those folks will be able to really answer very specific questions about the Deeming application. I can tell you there is a credentialing component to it, but in terms of sort of the details, those questions really need to go right to the BPHC folks.
Okay, but I don't really have a specific question, and I am going to training next week on it, but I'm just wondering what part do these two things, so the credentialing is a part of the Deeming, and the Deeming is something HRSA-based?
Yes, I think loosely, I think I'm pretty safe to say that within part of the Deeming application process does require you to provide some information to BPHC about your credentialing policies and procedures, and also information about your credentialed providers.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
The other resource that you might want to go to, and you can get some of the call-in information from that BPHC helpline, but they do have a technical assistance call scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, and that's at 1 o'clock Eastern. And they'll go into some detail, and that's hosted by BPHC, and they'll go into some detail about the requirements the whole deeming process, including the credentialing component.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. And I think, Catherine, given the time, we'll take maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap it up from this end.
Thank you. The last question will come from Debbie Goolsby. Go ahead. Your line is open.
Thank you. I was wanting to check on student credentialing, if there's any requirement to do that. We've had some debate when we have nursing students or FNP students coming through to work with providers. If we have an agreement with the educational institution, is that adequate, or do we need to go through the credentialing process on each student as well?
Well, because volunteers would need to be credentialed, I think it's going to take a look at what the role is that the student is actually playing. And if this student has contact with providers and who are providing direct patient care, you may want to go a little further just to be very careful that you're not missing anything. I think simply a letter that the individual is a student may not necessarily be enough. You might want to go a little further beyond that to ensure that the person is who she or he says that he is. I take a look at what you might be doing for volunteers who may be working with licensed providers and maybe track that.
That's another area where I'll recommend that you might want to get in touch with the Bureau of Primary Health Care, because they can certainly answer that as it relates specifically to HRSA's requirements.
Great. We've been doing the same thing for volunteers that we are for regular providers, and it's been a little overwhelming. But we've been conducting the exact same kind of a credentialing process.
So I think Paul's suggestion is a very wise one.
Great. Thank you.
Just one other thing I'll chime in right before we end is in your agreement with the teaching facility for your students, just look at where the coverage for any liability lies and be sure that's spelled out.
Thanks, Kathy. That's a good point. Well, I'm sure we have some questions on the line that we weren't able to get to because of time, and I do want to invite those questions. Please do send them to us. Again, you can email us at clinical_RM_program@ecri.org or call us at 610-825-6000, our extension 5200. And again, that contact information is on the very last slide. You've had some really great questions come in today, so we certainly welcome you to continue those. You'll also see a written summary of the questions and answers that we received posted with the archived audio conference when this goes up on the Clinical Risk Management website. So you'll see these questions and answers again. Otherwise, we do invite you to be in touch with us, and we really do appreciate everybody's attendance and some great questions we got this afternoon.